You may have heard the news our friendliest neighbor Canada is quietly turning away from American goods, but what few notice is that behind them a series of other countries are also silently pulling back.
It's going to be tough. I know today I just walked in there, they got everything marked for Canada, which I do like.
From Mexico, France to the UK, Germany, former close partners of the US are now seeking their own paths. A widespread breakup has taken place, and the consequence is numerous American businesses suffering losses. American brands are being sidelined, and American consumers, especially those struggling with electricity, gas, and food prices, are the first to feel it clearly. In this video, we will explore 10 countries quietly siding with Canada and what that really means for America today. Please note that this information is compiled from statistical data and is not intended to defame any organization or individual. Number 1. Mexico. For decades, Mexico has been America's most trusted trading partner. The two share borders and supply chains. From beans and avocados to auto parts, Mexico has always chosen the US as its first destination. But early June, a container convoy leaving the port of Manzanillo did not head north as usual. Instead, they turned west straight to Vancouver, Canada. Rewind 3 days earlier, Mexico and Canada quietly signed a new trade corridor linking the Pacific directly to British Columbia. Exactly when the US decided to double tariffs on aluminum and steel, a move that made many countries hesitate. Mexico did not oppose or negotiate, they redirected. According to Export Development Canada, in the first week of June, goods registered from Mexico to Canada increased by 31%, while shipments to the US dropped by 12%. Containers that once poured into Texas and California now head straight to Ontario and British Columbia. Mexican businesses do not announce changes. They simply choose different customers in a way clearer than any political statement. The impact has appeared in many places. In El Paso, a border town reliant on Mexico's supply chain, a car parts factory recently cut over a quarter of its workforce due to canceled orders. In Arkansas, Walmart's distribution center noted deliveries from Mexican farms were delayed 2 to 3 days because goods were stuck at the border following tightened import policies from June 4th. Even on the production ground, American car makers are starting to feel the pressure. GM and Ford, dependent on southern parts, face supply chain delays. Meanwhile, Canada's electric vehicle company Lion Electric just opened an office in Guadalajara and quickly secured orders that previously went to Detroit. The I-35 corridor through Texas, once called North America's commercial backbone, is quieter now. Mexican licensed trucks are becoming scarce. Roadside diners and rest stops, once bustling with commercial traffic, are now sparse. Mexico is not declaring war. They are simply turning down a different path and not looking back. For Americans, especially in the southern states, this raises a big question when the closest friend starts to change course. Who will be next? Number 2. Germany. A small poster is pasted on a worn wall in an industrial park near Frankfurt hiring automation engineers. Work in Ontario, Canada. At first glance, nothing remarkable. But those who have passed by know it's an old Honeywell ad, a US company branch that opened here before the pandemic. The message is clear. German companies are shifting direction, and this time the destination is no longer the US. Just days ago, former German Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel told Westerkurier that Canada should join the European Union. The comment made some laugh, but in industry circles it reflects a growing feeling Canada is becoming a clearer, more predictable partner, something the US no longer maintains. Since the US raised aluminum and steel tariffs sharply on June 4th, many German corporations have begun reassessing all North American expansion plans. An internal Siemens document cited by Handelsblatt shows projects in Ohio are paused to reassess policy risks. Meanwhile, the Ontario office received budget approval within 3 days. Similarly, Bosch, a German industrial icon, is testing shipments of its first robot batch through Halifax instead of New York. These changes aren't about costs, they're about stability. In the eyes of many German executives, Canada has a European-like legal system, clear climate policies, and fewer sudden changes. They don't seek the cheapest country, but the most reliable one. Data from the German Trade Promotion Agency shows two-way trade between Germany and Canada rose nearly 20% in the first days of June, the highest in 8 years. High-tech products like medical sensors, automated robots, and control software once shipped to Chicago now divert to Montreal. At Hanover Fair, nearly 2/3 of Germany's SMEs said they are actively reducing dependence on the US market, especially in AI and clean energy sectors. In the US, this change hasn't caused an uproar yet. But in Michigan, mechanical engineers and automation report delayed shipments. Some must pre-order sensors from Germany a month in advance. In Pennsylvania, a GE supplier plant canceled 2 orders because European suppliers requested rerouting through Canada. No loud layoffs, just silent contracts vanishing from desks. Like German machinery, design precise. Quiet, steady, this shift makes no noise but leaves a clear gap. In states once tied to European tech like Ohio and Michigan, that gap grows every week. Other countries will notice the same. Can you guess the next name on today's list? Number 3, France. Who would have guessed France would appear on this list? A longtime US ally, a loyal G7 member, a nation known for picky tastes yet fond of American food products. Yet in the first months of 2025, France's consumer market changed in ways we can't ignore. In the first week of June 2025, France's 3 largest supermarket chains, Carrefour, Intermarché, and Leclerc, simultaneously reduced orders from American food suppliers. Instead, they increased orders from Canada, especially products from Quebec, a region European gourmets regard as close in flavor to French consumption culture, but more stable in policy. France's Ministry of Agriculture offered a brief explanation to ensure climate standards and secure supply chains, but everyone knows this is a systemic reaction. When logistics costs from the US surged due to a domino effect from steel tariffs, European retailers didn't want to bet on a risky supply source. Especially in France, where trust in food quality is almost part of the national identity. The hardest hit items include beef industrial, dairy processed cheese, and soybeans, all key exports from states like Iowa, Nebraska, and Wisconsin. Preliminary data from France Agrimer show US beef orders dropped more than 17% in the first week of June, while Canadian orders rose nearly 22%. This means hundreds of tons of goods are stuck in Midwest cold storage, where a day of halted production could cost dozens of jobs. In Iowa, farmers are forced to sell domestic soybeans at prices 20% lower than previous European export contracts. In Wisconsin, once the U.S. industrial dairy capital, some plants have temporarily shut production lines or laid off staff within days due to unsold stock. For American farmers often unseen on TV but who keep the country's shelves full, France's silent shift is no distant story. It's an electric bill, health insurance, and dinner table cuts. And when countries that once took American goods as a default start looking elsewhere for beef butter, soybeans, or cheese competitive standing is no longer guaranteed. Not by statements, but by silent actions, America is losing ground at the global dining table. Number 4, Australia. In Texas, a metallurgical engineer who just lost his job sighed while watching the aluminum furnace shut down earlier than usual. They said the orders from Australia were cut. "I'll probably have to find another job in a few months," he told an old colleague in Louisiana over the phone. This story isn't unique. It's one of countless silent shifts changing the North American trade map, and this time, Canada is the winner. Few noticed that since early June, trains carrying bauxite ore from Western Australia have rerouted away from Galveston Port, Texas, turning straight to Prince Rupert, a deep water port in British Columbia. No loud announcements, no grand signing ceremonies, but according to Australian financial review Rio Tinto, the Australian mining giant has shifted about 80% of its bauxite export contracts for the second half of this year to smelters in Ontario and Quebec. As for longtime partners in the US, they only received promises of "we will reconsider" later. The reason is simple. After the US increased aluminum and steel tariffs by 50% from June 4th, Canada immediately opened a new trade corridor from Prince Rupert to Saguenay, a region hungry for raw materials for battery and clean energy production. No cumbersome paperwork, no strict inspections. For Australian exporters, Canada became an open door. The US is a bothersome barrier. This is no good news for Apple in California or Tesla in Fremont. According to S&P Global data, Australian bauxite and lithium shipments to Canada rose 36% in just 1 week, while orders to the US sharply declined. Apple faces the risk of aluminum shortages for MacBook shells within 60 days. Tesla had to send a logistics team urgently to South America because Australian lithium, a previous lifeline, is now flowing to Quebec. Even GM and Ford are beginning to worry electric vehicle plants in Michigan and Kentucky, which once relied on materials imported through Mexico, are now seeing those sources reduced because Canada is willing to pay better prices to get priority. But Canada is not just Australia's new home. They are nurturing a new name, Sayona Mining, a Canada-Australia joint venture that now controls 40% of refined lithium in Quebec. Previously, US corporations easily competed for this supply. Now Sayona's output is almost exclusively reserved for electric vehicle battery projects in Toronto, Vancouver. And even exports to the EU, the US is left out. And what about ordinary Americans? An electric car may cost $800 to $200 more due to the lack of cheap lithium. Plants in Texas and Louisiana are cutting shifts. California consumers will have to wait longer for a new MacBook or pay higher prices. Even people in the Midwest, Michigan, Ohio can feel it clearly. Ford and GM are reducing electric vehicle production, accessory contracts are postponed. Hundreds of mechanics feared losing their jobs. The irony is that Australia does not choose sides, they just choose an easier, faster, less risky path. And Canada silently but effectively embraces this opportunity. The US, though not openly boycotted, is gradually being pushed out of the most important supply chain of the 21st century battery technology, clean energy electric vehicles. The question is not has Australia turned its back on the US, but when even neutral partners quietly lean toward Canada, who will be next. Number 5, India. The iPhone you hold this summer may not be as cheap as you think because it is assembled in a place no longer America's close friend. A Best Buy employee in Austin looked at me awkwardly when I asked the price of the new iPhone. It's now over $110 more due to changes in import taxes. It's assembled in India, no longer receiving previous preferences. I laughed, but it turned out he was serious. Since early 2025, a series of new tax regulations have been applied by the US to tighten controls on technology products assembled abroad. And the iPhone heavily produced by Apple in India is right in the middle of the storm. Foxconn, Pegatron, and Wistron now have large factories in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, assembling most standard iPhone versions for the US market. But as trade relations between the US and India cooled down, things began to change direction. India did not openly cut ties or oppose the US, they simply silently shifted. The Economic Times reported that 3 major Apple component suppliers in India signed contracts to ship primarily to Canada instead of the US. For a simple reason, Canada is less risky, easier to settle payments with, and has friendlier tax rates. The result, iPhone delivery times in the US were extended by an average of 7 to 10 days. Some retail chains in New York and San Francisco announced shortages especially for special colors or large capacity models, but that is only the tip of the iceberg. The hidden part is the price, not only due to taxes, but also because of shortages in components more expensive, replacement or repair processes. An Apple Store technician in Denver said that the cost to replace the battery and rear camera of the iPhone 15 has increased by 18% because the supply chain is slowing down from India. Not only consumers are affected. In Illinois and Ohio, where many logistics and service companies supporting Apple operate support contracts have begun to be cut. A shipping company specializing in moving components from Los Angeles port to Apple's warehouse in Texas had to reduce 40% of its staff last month after 3 large orders from Chennai were redirected to the Vancouver port via the Canada route. These silent changes affect the income of thousands of American workers, from truck drivers to warehouse employees. Worse, if this trend continues, states like California with dense Apple Store networks and the highest number of tech consumers will face longer waits and higher prices. Apple may try to compensate by increasing production in Vietnam or Brazil, but nowhere can replace India as fast a rising tech factory with over 1.4 billion people. India needs no declaration. They just need to move container by container, production line by production line off the US orbit. And since Apple depends heavily on the Indian supply chain, Americans may not notice this change until their wallets feel it most clearly. So next time you see a new iPhone arriving later than usual, costing several dozen dollars more, or charging extra for battery replacement, don't just blame inflation or Apple. Look farther to where it is assembled and to the changing relationships behind it. Number 6, South Korea. South Korea is still considered one of America's closest allies in Asia. The two countries are closely linked in defense, share high-tech supply chains, and have stood together through many phases of global instability. But over the past 6 months, a series of quiet moves by major South Korean corporations show that Seoul is charting its own course. And that course is increasingly leading to Canada. A key player in the global battery supply chain has just indefinitely halted its cathode material plant expansion project in Michigan, USA. No press release, no official explanation. But just days later, POSCO announced an investment of nearly 500 billion won to build a new plant in Saguenay, Quebec, to serve the North American market. According to Korea Herald, June 8, 2025, this plant will supply battery materials to General Motors and several Canadian electric vehicle makers, with delivery times prioritized twice as fast compared to similar contracts in the US. Let's look at the reasons. On one hand, there are new tariffs Washington has imposed on steel, aluminum, and technology components from Asia. On the other hand, there's the risk of unpredictable policy changes, as a POSCO executive stated in a private meeting. Instead of confrontation, Korean corporations choose to pivot quietly, without loud announcements, only shifting capital flows. A similar development occurred with Hyundai Heavy Industries. A research center project on fuel cell batteries and smart chip systems had been planned for Alabama, a state that had deepened cooperation with Korea post-pandemic. But in early June, Hyundai unexpectedly signed a new agreement with Ontario, Canada. No rejection of the US, just simply no longer choosing it. This shift at first glance appears strategic, but for American consumers, the consequences are very real. Tesla is currently struggling to receive lithium-ion battery components on time, which depend on POSCO's supply chain. According to an internal report from a supply group in Fremont, component costs have risen about 12% since early May, potentially increasing the price of the standard Model Y by $200 in the next quarter. It's not just cars. The largest American aircraft manufacturer is also experiencing delays receiving lightweight metal airframes previously supplied by Korean businesses. Some of these have been redistributed to Canadian partners. The result, several domestic commercial aircraft orders will be delayed until the end of the year, affecting airlines in the Midwest and East Coast regions. In states like Michigan, Alabama, or Washington, once industrial anchors for U.S.-Korea cooperation, many production engineers and supply chain workers are beginning to feel the difference. Fewer contracts, postponed projects, and internal meetings, increasingly lacking clear information about the future. South Korea does not need to declare leaning toward Canada, nor are they turning their backs on the U.S., but in an increasingly complex geopolitical context, these quiet choices say a lot. Investment money is flowing north. Assembly lines too, and if a longtime ally begins to seek a more secure footing elsewhere, perhaps it's time for Americans to ask who really keeps you steady in unstable times, and how. Number 7, Norway. The Arctic has never been this crowded, not because of people, but because of radar satellites and underwater cables sprouting like roots beneath the permanent ice. In the new race to control strategic infrastructure in the polar region, one name is moving very fast, but very skillfully: Norway. Norway has not cut ties with the US, nor signed a public agreement with Canada, but every action they take, from radar navigation, satellite cooperation, to budget priorities, clearly signals what diplomacy has yet to say. They're placing their trust in an Arctic order, where the US no longer holds the central position. In the Barents Sea, the patrol ship KV Svalbard was recently equipped with seabed sonar and radar systems partly funded by Canada. Further west, the Andoya satellite station, once a strategic military weather monitoring point, has begun receiving signals from new reconnaissance satellites developed alongside the CSPO alliance, including Canada, the UK, Germany, Australia, and several Nordic countries. The US is not part of this co-development. What is happening Norway as chair of the Arctic Council, 2023-2025, is quietly transforming the cold white land into a new data and defense hub, not only to observe, but to control information. The North Seal Project, a network of anti-sabotage cables and deep-sea radar, once rumored to be led by the US, now clearly lists Canada and Norway as key partners. And when Washington wants to access data from these stations, they must start working through Oslo. Sounds distant. Not at all. Alaska residents, who depend on ocean current data for offshore fishing, are witnessing access costs to information doubling. Some logistics firms in Seattle, once users of NOAA meteorological maps, now have to rent data from Norwegian-Canadian companies at no longer allied prices. Even some farms in Maine report that early frost warnings came later this year, because servers are located in Europe. The surprise is not that Norway acts. It is that they act so subtly, so quietly, to the point that when Americans notice, the radar has already shifted and the data ownership has changed. There is no betrayal here, only a reshuffling about who is trustworthy in a world no longer black and white, but only the blue-gray of sea and ice. And in this game, Canada, not the US, is the new pivot Norway is betting on. Number 8, United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has long been seen as America's old friend, a close ally bonded through decades of military, political, and economic cooperation. But in today's volatile modern trade world, that special relationship now faces new challenges as the UK deals with unexpected changes from the US and the rise of Canada. It began at an electric vehicle factory in Birmingham where Mr. Tom, a longtime technician, was carefully checking parts lists. Today, the lithium battery assembly line abruptly stopped because a shipment of batteries expected from Ohio was delayed. Instead, a shipment just arrived from Toronto's port of Southampton. The old machinist sighed. Though farther away, it's clearly less risky. No technical failure or strike, just supply chain changes caused by new US tax policies implemented at the end of May. According to recent analyses, since May 31, 2025, the US has added regulations in its federal electric vehicle tax incentive program, applying only to products imported from countries with a free trade agreement (FTA) with the US. The UK still lacks a separate FTA with the US and was suddenly excluded from this incentive list. This forced UK manufacturers to quickly adjust rerouting part shipments through Toronto, where Canada has just finalized a new chain of tariff agreements with both the US and the EU. The consequences are not limited to electric vehicles. The pharmaceutical supply chain, especially companies like Pfizer, has begun to be affected. A Financial Times report notes that many cancer treatment drugs previously shipped directly from Boston to London now must go through Canada, delaying delivery times. Yet American consumers rarely notice these changes. But in Michigan, a Rivian car customer complained about a 3-week order delay. At pharmacies, pharmacists have had to explain why specialty medicines are running late due to complex shipping routes. Goods have not disappeared, but the path to consumers has become longer and more costly. Although no official statements have come from the US or UK about these changes, financial markets have clearly reflected them. Investment flows into the UK electric vehicle manufacturing sector are slightly decreasing, while Ontario, Canada is becoming an attractive destination, drawing significant capital from the US and Asia. The question is, though an old friend and longtime ally, can the UK maintain its special status in America's eyes without firm trade agreements? Meanwhile, Canada, the new friend, is seizing the opportunity to grow and attract more attention. Number 9. Brazil. Brazil has never been a close ally of the US, nor a confrontational player, but simply a silent player in global trade. Yet now even this neutral country has quietly made its choice. Since tariff changes, Brazil has had to find a new direction for its supply chains. Instead of returning to the US, traditionally a large market, many Brazilian businesses have decided to strengthen cooperation with Canada, which is expanding multilateral trade agreements and creating more favorable export incentives. Perhaps this is an understandable choice. Canada is not only a crucial gateway to North America, but also a strategic transshipment hub helping Brazil maintain and grow export contracts for agricultural products like soybeans, beef, and bioethanol. According to Canada's Agriculture Department, soybean imports from Brazil in early June doubled compared to the previous month, reflecting a major shift in supply chains. Moreover, new contracts between Brazil and Canada are being signed quickly, allowing Brazil access to the US market and other partners through Canada's preferential trade channels. This is unwelcome news for American farmers in states like Iowa, Nebraska, and Minnesota, who have long relied on exporting agricultural goods both domestically and internationally. They now lose direct market share to Brazil and must compete with Brazilian goods routed through Canada with lower costs and easier procedures. The result is an impact on the U.S. domestic market prices for beef bioethanol and processed corn, and soybean products show slight upward trends due to disrupted or redirected supply. It is important to note that Brazil is simply protecting its economic interests in a world where tariffs and trade agreements change rapidly. Leaning toward Canada gives Brazil a backdoor to maintain market share and continue growth, avoiding risks posed by U.S. policies. So the story is not just about tariffs or goods, but about a new trade order where countries quietly choose partners based on practical benefits. And here, Brazil favors Canada as a smart choice, rather than continuing to bet on an increasingly unpredictable player. Number 10. Sweden. And the last name on today's list is Sweden. A country not choosing Canada out of personal sentiment but for a very practical reason: green technology. As Swedish businesses increasingly focus on environmental and sustainable development, they have started shifting toward cooperation with Canada, where tax incentives and policies supporting clean tech industries are clearer. Last May, the Canadian Energy Industry Council reported that lithium battery component imports from Sweden to Canada rose nearly 40% year over year. New contracts on recycled materials and environmentally friendly products were signed rapidly in the first quarter of 2025, helping Swedish manufacturers benefit from incentives and making supply chains more sustainable and transparent. This choice is not only based on tax figures or economic benefits, but also because businesses want to partner with those committed strongly to carbon emission reduction and environmental protection. Canada, with its Clean Tech Growth Accelerator program and expanded trade agreements with Europe, provides an environment well suited for green development plans. A specific example is a well-known Swedish electric vehicle battery manufacturer. They began importing components from Canada instead of through the US, reducing shipping and import tax costs by up to 12%. This not only lowers product prices, but also meets increasingly strict environmental standards demanded by the market. However, this shift presents a significant challenge for the U.S. The U.S. Department of Energy recently announced that due to unstable component supplies from traditional partners, electric vehicle prices in some states have risen nearly 5% compared to last year. Insufficient supply leads to higher prices, forcing consumers to consider green purchases more carefully. Meanwhile, Canada is increasingly becoming North America's sustainable supply chain hub, especially with support from European countries like Sweden. No loud announcements are needed. This cooperation shift says it all. Sweden has chosen a partner that meets sustainability and stability criteria, Canada. At a time when environment and sustainability are top priorities, turning to partners with shared views is a smart and necessary move. Sweden is not simply choosing Canada, but choosing a greener, more transparent future for itself and the world. We have just reviewed 10 countries, from close neighbors, longtime allies, to strategic partners, gradually changing how they trade with the United States. They're choosing new directions, hoping to build a more stable and balanced future. This directly affects our lives, from prices to job opportunities. What do you think about these shifts? Is it time for Americans to rethink how they connect with the world, or are these just temporary changes? We look forward to hearing your opinions and thoughts on this matter. We want to emphasize that this video does not intend to create division or encourage separatism in the United States. All content aims to analyze, explore, and open discussion based on current events, sentiments, and social trends.